Under Khosrow II, Sassanid Persia brought the Eastern Roman Empire almost to its knees. If victorious, the Persians would have rivaled their Achaemenid forebears in both power and majesty. But after 26 years of widespread devastation and vast losses of men and material, the Romans emerged victorious. Emperor Heraclius restored the eastern border, while Persia slipped into civil war. No one would have believed that shortly after the calamitous Persian War, Constantinople should be visited by a disaster of an even greater magnitude, much less that large parts of the empire would slip irrevocably into the hands of a foreign power. Yet in the faraway lands of arid Arabia, Roman affairs were being eagerly watched. A man known as the Prophet Muhammad brought together the peoples of Arabia under the banner of Islam. In AD 636, his successors crushed the Romans at the river Yarmouk. The pivotal battle broke the backbone of Rome's eastern armies. Subsequently, the Levant was rapidly overwhelmed. Then, the Muslims drew up their forces and marched on Roman Egypt. Making history videos is a dream job for me, but it would not be possible without sponsors. So I'd like to thank BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. BetterHelp is a platform that makes therapy accessible to everyone using technology. I wholeheartedly believe that therapy can help connect with yourself and to understand how to be a happier, healthier person in your mind. Therapy has changed my own life over the past couple of years. With BetterHelp, you don't need to plan visits, call therapist offices, or check if it works with your insurance. It's all done online. You sign up and you take a quiz that quickly shows where you're at mentally and what you need to work on, how you want to change. Then the platform matches you to a therapist in their huge network of tens of thousands of licensed therapists. From there, you start communicating with your therapist through texting, phone calls, or video calls. All of the scheduling is done on the platform, and if you feel that your therapist isn't a good fit, you can easily switch to a different one with a click of a button. Our mental health is just as important as our physical health. So just as we put time and effort into staying fit and eating healthy, we should make the same effort to keep our minds healthy. And BetterHelp's mission is to make this possible for everyone. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/HistoryMarche. When you click that link, you get 10% off your first month. So you can try it out at a discount and see if it works for you. And you can cancel at any time. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. In the autumn of AD 640, the Muslim army crossed the Sinai and followed the mountains of the eastern desert. Their aim? To strike Middle Egypt. The route through the eastern desert was chosen because the area between the Red Sea and the Nile was known as the country of the Arabs since the times of Alexander the Great, due to the significant Arab population that lived in the region. Flavius Theodosius, the Dux of Arcadia, took charge of defending the province, but was caught by surprise by the interlopers, who crossed the Nile onto the west bank and proceeded to pillage the area around the city of Oxyrhynchus. Theodore, the Magister Militum of Egypt, intervened. He dispatched troops to contain the Arabs and garrisoned Lahun, which was strategically placed to defend the entrance to the rich region of the Fayum Oasis. Lastly, the main army, commanded by Theodore himself, began its march from Alexandria to aid the defense of Arcadia. Meanwhile, the Roman field army at Fayum, under the command of John, moved against the advancing enemy. The Muslims promptly turned and retreated, not wishing to risk losing their plunder in a pitched battle. They moved south through the western desert, while their Roman counterparts advanced along the Nile to prevent them from recrossing at Oxyrhynchus. At the same time, Theodosius organized forays to scout the eastern parts of Arcadia and gain an idea of the foe he faced. With their way blocked, the Muslims regrouped and attacked the Roman army. John fell in battle, and the Romans were routed. Oxyrhynchus was sacked shortly after. This left the outnumbered garrison at Lahun against the rampaging Arabs. They were quickly overrun. The battle for Egypt was turning against the Romans. News of the terrible defeat reached Theodosius, who was near the city of Nikiu. He promptly sent Leontius with a detachment to Abuit to take command there, while he advanced to Babylon, which was the key fortress defending access to the Nile Delta. Theodore, initially planning to join the defense of Arcadia, now stopped and established himself near Leucogion. From there, he led sorties against the Muslims, preventing further incursions into the Fayum, but failed to win a decisive victory. The Roman army of Egypt was shaken, but they managed to fight the Arabs to a stalemate. By now, word of the troublesome developments in Egypt reached Constantinople. The elderly Emperor Heraclius blamed his generals, especially for the death of John, labeling them as incompetent. This did nothing but alienate the Romano-Egyptian high command. The relationship between Constantinople and Egypt was already strained due to the heavy-handed influence of the imperial government and the violent persecution against Monophysite Christians, some of whom were Arabs. This led many living in the areas along the Nile and important officials to defect to the invading Muslims. And the latest accusations from the emperor only served to further fracture Egypt's already fragile political stability. Dux Theodosius and his colleague Anastasius, as well as their subordinates, were especially offended, which only harmed the war effort. Matters went from bad to worse for the Romans with the arrival of another Muslim army from Palestine under the command of Amr ibn al-Asi, opening a second front. Theodore sent half of his troops to strengthen Babylon and help Theodosius against the main Arab thrust. Meanwhile, Amr ibn al-Asi advanced southwest into Egypt by maneuvering around Roman fortifications. He reached the Nile heading south along the delta, unable to breach the wide riverbank. His main objective was to link up with the Muslim forces on the west bank. But Amr was again forced to stop near the fort of Tendunius, just north of Babylon and the important city of Heliopolis. Recognizing that he was significantly outnumbered, he requested reinforcements from Caliph Umar, as venturing deeper into Egypt would be futile. The Caliph obliged by sending another 4,000 troops. But these reinforcements would take weeks to arrive, while the Roman army was gathering. Troops from Lower Egypt were sent as Theodosius's rank swelled to 20,000. In addition, Theodore decided to march back with the rest of his army to Babylon to meet the Muslim commander, leaving behind one of his officers, Domitianus, to protect the Fayum. During this time, the Muslim reinforcements also arrived, bolstering Amr's army to 12,000. Despite being severely outnumbered, the Muslim commander stood his ground. In Babylon, Theodosius and his colleague Anastasius unexpectedly marched out of the city to meet the enemy, instead of waiting for Theodore's reinforcements. They were tired of waiting for Theodore to arrive, and the emperor's accusations of incompetence may have struck a nerve, and they were eager to prove their worth by stopping the Muslims themselves. Another factor that made the Romans keen to fight rather than wait was the upcoming inundation of the Nile and the need to disperse the army to gather the harvest. Early in the morning, the Romans sallied forth. Clearly at a significant numerical advantage, Theodosius and Anastasius spurred the men on to clear the field of the last Muslim. Seeing the charge, the Roman garrison at Tendunius left the walls to join the fight. The large contingent of Roman infantry and archers weaved their way between the many monasteries, hamlets, and gardens that littered the fields on the outskirts of Babylon and Heliopolis. When the two lines clashed, from the outset the battle seemed a foregone conclusion. The Arab army was no match for the overwhelming Roman force. Yet amid the battering of arms and armor, under the blistering Egyptian sun and the choking dust that filled the air, the Muslim commander had, in fact, trapped his enemy. Before the start of the battle, he had split his force. His best cavalry were sent east to hide among the nearby hills, while he remained with the main body in the center. Now, he gave the signal to his cavalry to circle around and strike the Romans in the rear. Having been lured into a pitched battle, Theodosius's and Anastasius's men were pinned down. Caught completely by surprise, their only hope was to break Amra's main line before the Arab cavalry closed in. A final, desperate push was mounted by the Romans. The Muslims were pushed back and gaps opened in their line. As sword blows struck shields and tore through flesh, Amra and his captains struggled to keep the men from routing. And the Muslim line held. As the Arab cavalry swung around, the Roman troops in the rear turned to face them. What ensued was a terrible slaughter. Almost completely surrounded, Theodosius's and Anastasius's army faced annihilation. Individual Roman officers gathered what men they could to mount a cohesive breakthrough to withdraw behind the walls of Tendunius. As the chaotic mass of Roman soldiers fought their way towards safety, it was perhaps then that Theodosius fell in battle. His name is not mentioned after the Battle of Heliopolis, so it is possible he did not survive the day. While the Romans made their fighting withdrawal, trying to extract themselves, Amra unleashed the last piece of his trap. A small Muslim detachment, who were laying low near Tendunius, charged the Romans, attacking yet another flank. The line of retreat was severed. Despite their valiant efforts, Anastasius and the remnants of the army were now completely encircled. Unable to take the punishment any longer, they broke and fled. Some headed for the ships on the Nile, hoping to sail upstream towards Babylon. Others clawed their way back towards Tendunius. Attempts to mount a defense were abandoned, and the fort was deserted. What little remained of the army fled to Nikiu. Theodore and the remaining Roman army retreated north to the delta, where a new defensive line was established. Having won another decisive victory, the Muslims captured Tendunius and then besieged Babylon, now held by the much-reduced garrison of the fortress. To make matters worse, at Abuit, when Domitianus heard of the catastrophic defeat, he panicked. At night, he left the city defenseless and fled to Nikiu by ship. This act of cowardice may be why chronicles derisively describe him as the fat officer, depicting him as an obese and feeble man lacking military experience. But in a strategic sense, after the defeat at Heliopolis, Domitianus stood between two victorious enemy armies and was at risk of being encircled. Nevertheless, his action resulted in the effective abandonment of the Fayum to the Muslims. Having routed the Romans, Amr ibn al-Asi besieged Babylon and sent messengers to Roman collaborators, demanding their assistance. He ordered George, the patriarch of the city of Calliope, to build a pontoon bridge to the north of Babylon for the Arab army to cross the Nile. Once the bridge at Calliope was complete, it blocked the Romans from traversing the Nile south of the delta. Babylon was encircled and its garrison cut off. From this point on, there was nothing the Romans could do to aid loyalist forces still holding out in Upper Egypt. Now the Roman defections began en masse. The interdenominational strife and violent persecution in Egypt, as well as high taxation, forced many to consider the Muslim invaders as a viable alternative. Meanwhile, loyalist Egyptians fled to the Roman-controlled delta. Amr ibn al-Asi, now strengthened by more troops and provisions, launched forays into the Nile delta along the eastern bank. Resistance was met with swift retribution. But at Sebennytus, the Romans finally defeated Amr in a pitched battle as he attempted to take the city. The campaigning season was nearly over, so the Muslim commander marched back to Upper Egypt. He chose as his base the city of Busiris and proceeded to fortify the place. On 11th of February AD 641, the aging emperor Heraclius died. He had intended that both of his sons should rule together, with his surviving wife, Empress Martina, also having a share in power. However, the younger son, Heraclonus, and his mother Martina were sidelined by the court and senate to make Heraclius Constantine III, the elder son of Heraclius by his late first wife, Eudokia, the senior emperor. Despite being terminally ill with tuberculosis, Constantine III sprang into action to try and rescue the situation in Egypt. He summoned Cyrus, the Patriarch of Alexandria, and Theodore, the Magister Militum, so they could appraise him of the situation there. Meanwhile, the attention of the Muslims was directed towards consolidating their gains. This respite allowed Theodore the opportunity to answer the emperor's summons. He left Dux Anastasius in command of what remained of Roman Egypt, while he and Cyrus journeyed to the emperor to solicit more imperial support and instructions. Determinedly, Constantine promised that he would send an army in the autumn. Finally, the bond between the imperial government and the leadership of Egypt was re-established. Unfortunately, the death of the sick emperor in May AD 641, after only 3 months on the throne, meant that all of these preparations amounted to nothing. He was succeeded by his brother Heraclonus, with his mother Martina acting as regent. She became de facto ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire. Knowing that they lacked the support of the court and senate, upon meeting Cyrus, Theodore, and other high-ranking officials from Egypt, Martina offered them unprecedented powers in exchange for their support. But the attempt backfired. Many were uneasy about Heraclonus becoming emperor because of the consanguinity of the marriage of Heraclius and Martina, as she was Heraclius's niece. Moreover, false rumors spread that Constantine III had been poisoned by her, which further harmed her reputation. Matters came to a head when the general Valentine ousted Heraclonus and replaced him with the eldest son of Constantine III. He sent word to both Patriarch Cyrus and the Magister Militum Theodore, asking them not to intervene in his coup, nor to recognize the rule of Heraclonus. Neither of the Egyptian leaders had much love for the interloper emperor and promptly returned to Egypt, leaving Valentine to act unimpeded. Thus, facing little opposition, Valentine installed the son of Constantine III to the throne, who would become known to history as Constans II. The political turmoil proved detrimental for the Roman war effort in Egypt. With no pushback coming from the Nile Delta, Amr ibn al-Asi spent the rest of the year finishing off Roman resistance in Upper Egypt. Roman forces, cut off from the Nile Delta, concentrated in Antinoe. Holding out courageously under siege, they defended the city and citadel to the last man. By the end of AD 641, the last Roman holdout in Upper Egypt was lost. Next spring, Amr ibn al-Asi renewed his offensive. He built a road from Babylon to Sebennytus to improve the ferrying of supplies and siege weapons. Once there, the Muslims set the city ablaze using incendiaries, forcing the Roman garrison to abandon the inferno. In May, the besieged fortress of Babylon and its remaining garrison surrendered. On Easter Monday AD 642, the city was lost to the invaders. The fall of Babylon and the destruction of Sebennytus were calamitous for the Roman defense of Egypt. The city of Nikiu was now the last formidable stronghold left before the Muslims could attack Alexandria itself. Unfortunately for the Romans, Domitianus was in charge of the city's defense. Much like his poor showing at Aboit the year before, at Nikiu, Domitianus again lost his nerve and fled on a ship to Alexandria. This was a grievous blow to the morale of the Roman army, who, after witnessing their leader's flight, also fled in disarray. But the retreat went horribly. The Muslims simply charged into the mass of Romans trying to swim across the Nile and butchered all but one of them. The city of Nikiu was sacked soon after. The situation was bleak. Once Cyrus and Theodore returned from their trip to Constantinople, they found the Roman position in Egypt to be on the verge of collapse. The Romans were only saved by the closure of the campaigning season of AD 642. Finger-pointing and violent infighting now plagued the Egyptian high command. In this poisonous environment, by the time Theodore re-established a loyal chain of command, Roman forces had been pushed back to the suburbs of Alexandria. Unable to further resist the Arabs, Patriarch Cyrus traveled to Babylon to meet with Amr ibn al-Asi. They agreed to an armistice. The Romano-Egyptians were to pay a tribute. There was to be a ceasefire for 11 months, while the Roman army evacuated Alexandria without hindrance. No other Roman army was to enter Egypt during the ceasefire. The Muslims were to stay out of church affairs. The Jews in Alexandria were not to be harmed, and the Muslims would cease attacking the Egyptians. These were the terms for the surrender of Alexandria and the rest of Roman Egypt. Amr ibn al-Asi agreed, as did Theodore and the other civil, public, and ecclesiastic Roman authorities of Alexandria. In November AD 642, the withdrawal of the Roman army from Egypt began. By September AD 643, the handover of Alexandria was completed, with Amr ibn al-Asi entering the city to install his own governor, an Egyptian called John. This act formally ended 674 years of continuous Roman rule in Egypt. But the winds changed once again. On the 7th of November AD 644, Caliph Umar was assassinated, causing internal instability in the caliphate. In Egypt, unrest grew amongst the population as the inhabitants had paid the price for their freedom from religious persecution, with their taxes being tripled to help fuel the caliphate's war efforts. Furthermore, Amr ibn al-Asi was replaced and a new governor was sent by the Caliph Uthman, whose task was to increase taxes still further. It was in these circumstances of unrest and instability where Emperor Constans II saw a chance to regain the jewel of the Roman Empire. A casus belli was found when the Alexandrians sent letters to the emperor begging him for help. The city was held by a small garrison of 1,000 men. Constans II assembled a fleet of 300 ships and an army to retake Egypt. Manuel, an Armenian eunuch, was appointed commander of the expeditionary force. He was likely chosen because of his unquestionable loyalty to the emperor. In late AD 645, the Romans landed and defeated the Muslim garrison. Alexandria was back in Roman hands. Manuel led his forces out and quickly reconquered the mouth of the delta. Ports along the coast were recaptured, and a signal system was set up on the watchtowers to help defend the area. Preparations were made for a march up the river to continue the reconquest of Egypt. Without competent leadership on the Muslim side, there was nothing stopping Manuel from reaching Middle Egypt to recapture Babylon and topple the Arab government there. Furthermore, the presence of the Roman expeditionary force opened the way for more reinforcements. There was a real fear that if Roman hegemony was restored, the rest of Egypt would rebel against Arab rule. In early AD 646, on the urging of the Muslim leadership in Egypt, the Caliph reinstated the recently sacked Amr ibn al-Asi to command the armies and drive out the Roman expeditionary force. Amr ibn al-Asi made Babylon his headquarters. Wasting little time, he marched on Alexandria with an army of 15,000. Meanwhile, Manuel advanced south to retake the city of Nikiu with a force of similar size. The two armies faced off against each other under the walls of Nikiu, next to the banks of the Nile. The Romans assembled their forces in the usual fashion and began skirmishing, showering the Arabs with arrows for an hour. Then the two armies advanced against each other. The sun shone high in the Egyptian winter sky. The sound of water flowing and sloshing against the side of wooden ships shrank into insignificance as the Romans advanced with a thunder of hobnailed boots thumping against the silty soil of the green banks of the Nile. The two lines charged into each other. Swords struck down their foes, axes buried into soft flesh, shields smacked away the deadly thrusts of spears. Shouts of the wounded, cries of Christ the Victor rang forth and were met by the frenzied shrieks of God is great. In this melee of religions and empires, the fate of Egypt was being decided. In the thick of combat, the horse of Amr ibn al-Asi was struck by an arrow and died. The Muslim commander continued to fight on foot. Through valor and strength of arms, one of the Roman wings managed to break the Arab formation and put them to rout. But elsewhere, the Romans, for all of their tenacity and exertions, were unable to break the zeal of their enemy. In another part of the battle, a mounted Roman officer rode forth and issued a challenge to his Muslim counterpart, Hahumal of Zabid, who took up the challenge. They charged each other on their horses, spears leveled at each other. Failing to strike down his opponent, the Roman officer drew his sword, as did Hahumal. As this duel went on, some of the soldiers watched and cheered on their respective champion. The duel went on for a time, when at last Hahumal parried a thrust by the Roman officer and with a riposte cut deep into his opponent's collarbone. The Roman officer fell down dead. However, the victory was short-lived, Fahaumal was covered in wounds inflicted by the Roman officer. Exhausted, he breathed his last and fell to the ground moments afterwards. The battle continued to rage, but eventually the strength of Roman arms gave way, and by that evening the field belonged to the Arabs. Retreating to Alexandria in disorder, Manuel and his army fortified the city, erecting mangonels for a siege. After regrouping, Amr ibn al-Asi advanced on the Egyptian capital, vowing to raze its walls to the ground. In the subsequent fighting, much of Alexandria was destroyed by a massive fire. The Romans held on, but were eventually forced to retreat to their ships and sail away. Constans II's attempt to recover Egypt had failed. The loss of Roman Egypt was a significant blow to the Eastern Roman Empire. The loss of its huge grain supply meant that the grain doll, which had been issued in Constantinople since the 4th century, a practice that itself went back to the days of the Roman Republic, finally ceased. Furthermore, the loss of Egypt opened Libya and the rest of North Africa to Arab conquest. Carthage, the capital of Roman North Africa, was later lost in AD 698. In subsequent centuries, the Romans occasionally sent raids to sack Alexandria and plunder the Egyptian coastline. Another 500 years would pass until the reign of Manuel I Komnenos in the 12th century, when the Romans once again attempted to reconquer Egypt with their Crusader allies. But that is a story for another time. Big thanks to Eastern Roman History and Warhawk for collaborating with me on this video. They make excellent history content, so make sure to check out their channels and subscribe. Links are in the description. As always, we'll see you in the next one.